Yuki Tsunoda seems to have been completely ignored in being validated to get that second Red Bull seat in 2025 if Red Bull do pull the cord and get rid of Sergio Perez for that season. For me, though, I think he's done more than enough to earn that second seat. Once an understudy to Pierre Gasly in the AlphaTauri in his first couple of seasons, he's then moved on to outclassing De Vries and Daniel Ricciardo, who many expected to beat Yuki on more than one occasion and really take the lead in that team. But over the past couple of seasons, he's been able to find a level of consistency that many had questioned whether or not he'd be able to find. Now, this isn't me saying that Yuki is a sure thing and is a surefire bet to make that second Red Bull seat his own and keep it for the long term. But for me, I think the choice is pretty clear when you compare him to the other candidates. And I'd also like to point out that this isn't a total slander or disrespect to Liam Lawson, who I think is a very competent F1 driver and has done a brilliant job so far in his 2 short stints that he's had in the Racing Bulls car. But we have seen it with Alex Albon that once you get put into a car maybe a little bit too quickly, it can turn into a disaster. And to be honest, I would much rather see Lawson have the challenges of a full calendar year in one team, in the sister team that he's been at now for those 2 short stints, and just get a bit more experience under his belt. And also, you have to take into consideration that Yuki has been driving in that Red Bull sister team since 2021 and has gained a lot of experience in those 4 seasons he's driven in. And that's not to say that valid questions about his temperament and obviously about his consistency early doors weren't valid. They 100% were. We even saw in the first race of this season that when he was asked to swap with Danny Ricciardo, he wasn't exactly all too happy to do it. Now, that isn't going to fly at Red Bull if there so happens to be a case where he needs to swap for Max. But I do think that Yuki has learned from that, and we haven't really seen many big outbursts or anger shown towards his team. Of course, there's frustration that comes with every F1 driver, but I do think that Yuki has learned an important lesson from that, as he has done in every season he's driven in F1. But I also think that he's been able to utilise the tools available to him a lot more over the past 18 months or so. If we take a look at the car that he's been driving in this year, the Racing Bulls isn't exactly lighting up the lap times or the timesheets in F1. It's very much towards the back of the pack. It's obviously better than maybe the Saubers of the world, but Yuki is starting to try and utilise that machinery a lot more and a lot more efficiently at that. If you consider the fact that he's scored the majority of his team's points this year, beating Ricciardo and just nudging ahead of Lawson as well in the last 6 or 7 races that Lawson joined the team, and he qualified 3rd in the Sao Paulo Grand Prix, which is pretty impressive considering the machinery he has at his disposal. And then, if you actually look at the guy he could potentially replace in Perez, if you look at the last 7 races of the season, he has only just missed out on equaling Perez's points total by 1 solitary point. Sergio Perez in Red Bull machinery is struggling to beat the lead driver in the sister team. That tells you how bad it's been going for Perez. Not really just this season, but also, I would say, over the last 18 months or so. And when you consider all of the options at Red Bull's disposal, whether it's through the 2 teams they've got in F1, or you look at their sort of academy program, I just think Yuki makes the most sense out of everybody. So let's take it back to Lawson. While I think he is a very good F1 driver and he's done a great job in the 2 short stints that he's had so far, I just don't think he's got that level of experience yet to jump straight into a Red Bull car. Like I mentioned before with Albon, and I would argue Gasly were a little bit too ahead of their time going into that car, and there were reasons for putting them in there as quickly as they did. But again, we're in a different scenario here. You've got a couple of options on the table, and I just think that Lawson needs just a bit more time bedded into that second team to get a full calendar under his belt to then really be ready to go into the Red Bull first team. Because again, like I said before, it's one thing to fill in for small parts of the season. It's another thing entirely to go into your first full year being the teammate of Max Verstappen and all that pressure that comes with it. So let's take a look at Perez now. So I don't want to turn this particular section of the video into a bashing Perez section like a lot of videos on YouTube are at the minute with Sergio. But if you take a look at the last 18 months, it's just not been good enough. He knows that, the team knows that, and I think that's why Horner and Co are trying to move him maybe into an ambassador role or something along those lines. But unfortunately, the pace just isn't there. He just doesn't have it in that Red Bull car. Maybe moving to a lower team will bring that Sergio back of old, but at the minute, I just don't see how he's going to turn this around in 2025. And of course, Red Bull want to get the most out of that second seat. They don't want to see Sergio suffering in that seat. They want to maybe get him back to his full potential. And they tried doing a bunch of different things during the season in 2024, and they just didn't work. And I think that in 2025, they're going to need that second seat to at least have a chance at earning some points in every single race and be in competition for top 6 places, because that grid is starting to pack up at the top end. Now, let's move it to the youngsters in the Red Bull program. Are any of them really making enough of a case to jump straight into a Red Bull? I can't really say so. Hadjar had 2 FP1s this season. I think one was in Silverstone and another was in Abu Dhabi. And the reports are that he didn't really impress. So I don't think he's going to have done enough to justify getting a Red Bull seat straight away. There isn't really a junior in Red Bull's program at the minute that's doing the likes of what Verstappen did and really jumping out of Red Bull and saying, you know what, we're going to give this kid a try, who hasn't really jumped the pecking order to justify either being put in the sister team like Max did initially to being moved into Red Bull in the long-term future. No one is doing that at the minute. And that's just why I think when you add that into the Lawson and the Perez discussions, to me, anyway, it just makes all the sense in the world to put Yuki in the second Red Bull seat. Plus, the added benefit of putting Yuki in the car for this 2025 season is you only have a 1-year contract with Yuki at the minute. His contract with Red Bull is up at the end of 2025. So if it doesn't work out, you can cut him with relative ease, unlike what the Perez situation is right now, where you're having a bunch of negotiations, things have to be sorted out, ambassadorial role may be in play here. We don't know what's going on with Perez, but obviously it's a sticky situation that they have to cut through all the red tape with in terms of his contracts and such. But of course, giving Yuki that seat also then gives Lawson a full year in the Racing Bulls, and if he has a good year, whilst Yuki doesn't, that just further solidifies the argument that Lawson could do something in the Red Bull. And you also then get to see his pace, his consistency, and his overall character, and how that develops over the course of a full F1 calendar. The other benefit that I see in Yuki is he does have a very bullish attitude that many of Verstappen's previous teammates didn't really have. He's more than matched up with Gasly at the AlphaTauri, beaten De Vries and Ricciardo, who many felt were going to beat him. But of course, beating Verstappen is another thing entirely, and I'm not coming in here expecting Yuki to do that. And I don't think Red Bull would be either. I think Red Bull would just be wanting him to qualify and perform in the races as solidly as possible and just pick up some consistent points and just be a good backup to Max, which is all you can really expect of a guy going into that second Red Bull seat at the minute. Because, of course, we all know that McLaren, Ferrari, and Mercedes have now caught up with the Red Bulls and are basically mixing and matching in terms of who's going to win any given race at any given weekend. It means that having a good number 2 in their team is more vital and more important than ever. And one thing you can say about Yuki when it comes to his qualifying, he's very consistent. And I think in a Red Bull car, will get into the top 10 far more consistently than I think any of the other options will. And if you look at Perez, he's gone out in Q1 far too many times, really, that should be happening for a top level F1 team. If everyone was in the same car, maybe you would expect it a little bit more. But Red Bull have such an advantage over the middle of the pack that really the most you should expect from him, or the least you should expect from him, I should say, is P10 in qualifying. And he's been out in Q1 a bunch of times this year. And I just don't think with the overall raw pace that Yuki has, you would see that too often. And as I'm mentioning Yuki's qualifying, it'll give him a chance to mix it up with the guys in the higher echelon of the grid. You'll see him in top sixes. You'll dare say see him in top fives, I would imagine, if the Red Bull car is right. And plus, it will give Yuki the ability to help Max out earlier on in races, which Max hasn't really had all that consistently since Danny Ricciardo was in the team. It may well be that Yuki isn't the right answer for the long-term solution to Red Bull, but for 2025, I think he is the only really valid option that we have. Of course, I see the arguments for Lawson, but I just think it's too soon. And with that being said, let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think Yuki deserves a shot in that Red Bull, or do you think it should stay with Perez, or go to Lawson, or maybe one of the younger graduates in the Red Bull Academy? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you did enjoy the video, don't forget to hit a like on the video, leave a comment like I mentioned before, and if you do want to see more F1 content, hit that subscribe button. We greatly appreciate your support. And if you want to see more F1 content from the channel, why not check out this video here?